Welcome again to another session of the 14th annual Transforming the Teaching and Learning Environment virtual conference. I'm still Bob Hales, and I'll still be your moderator for the session. As a reminder, all of our sessions are closed caption. To view the captions, simply click on the closed caption icon on the toolbar by the screen. It should be live transcript. In addition, recordings of all of our sessions will be available within about an hour or so after the last session of the day. And you'll know the recording's available because you'll see the join session link adjacent to the session title has changed to a link called View Recording. Pretty clever. Also, don't forget, all attendees have access to the library of session recordings from the past 13 years. That's about 600. The top menu on the website now has a link called Sessions
Oh,
Library.
Mark called you accidentally, Eric. Sorry about that. Oh, well, Eric, since I got you, are you going to be, you still going to talk to Mark how we should be able to access that for tomorrow? I have to open it up to campus wide tomorrow, today or tomorrow. I'll let them know tomorrow, but should I still send out what you're sending me or?
Okay, we have, as you can see on the screen, our session is Interleaving in Online Courses. Designing online courses for retention. We have with us Lauren Hayes, who's an assistant professor of instructional technology at the University of Central Missouri. She actually enjoys teaching and designing courses.
Funny thing is,
Prior to her current position, she was an
I'm
academic
on
librarian.
on my computer, nothing.
And her research interests
Can't mute it.
include the scholarship of teaching and learning, digital literacy, and faculty development. Lauren, let me turn it over to you.
Thank you, Bob, and thank you everyone for being here this afternoon. I'm excited to share about this topic on interleaving. It's something that I have worked on for a while now, and there's a lot of research behind it. So I'm excited to share that with all of you. I think I just want to make sure everybody's muted so that way we're not getting any other feedback. But it looks like everybody is, so we will go ahead and move on. So what is interleaving? That's probably a good place to start. That might be a word you've heard before, or it might be a new term for you. But interleaving is the concept of alternating between different topics during learning instead of practicing kind of one skill at a time. Which can often be referred to as like blocked learning. So studies have shown that interleaving content, rather than only presenting information in separate instances throughout a class, promotes retention. And that is really that thing of promoting retention is really kind of key here, why I think interleaving is so useful and why others have been talking about it for a while as well. So now we're going to look a little bit about some of the research on interleaving. There is some research out of Good and McGill. So they published one of the early studies on this idea of alternating between concepts in 1986, and they specifically looked at individuals who were learning badminton serves. And this is from the abstract, but they specifically said that they studied 30 female subjects where they learned 3 badminton serves with either a blocked learning schedule, which would be kind of what they call low interference, which would be learning one type of badminton serve, following by learning the second and then the third. Or they used a serial approach to learning where they would have individuals.
Hey, Lauren.
Yes.
We're seeing the slideshow, resume slideshow. There you go. Thanks.
Okay. Okay, sorry about that. So then they would learn with serial with the badminton serves, where they would learn like badminton serve 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, or they would do kind of a random learning of badminton serves, like 1, 2, 1, 3, 2, 1, 3, etc. And so that was kind of their practice schedule. There were 3 different groups with either a low interference, they learned just 1, then the second, and then the third. It would alternate like 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, or again, have that kind of random practice schedule. And they did this for over kind of a 3-week period. What they found in this study was that the individuals who learned the best were those in the random group. So they performed better with the badminton serves. And then the blocked group who just learned kind of, as a 1 and then 2 and then 3. So that was, again, one of those early studies. But then there were some other studies. So one out of discipline of medicine.
Once again, that message, yeah.
Okay. I'll try to make
We
sure
hit the
that
wrong thing, I think.
Okay. I have my dual screens, but I'll make sure that I click back. So then you've got the medicine study on medicine, where in this article, it's called Practice Makes Perfect, the critical review of mixed practice in the acquisition of ECG interpretation skills. The researchers found that students exposed to an interleave approach in the practice phase had superior diagnostic accuracy compared to the accuracy for a blocked session. And then in the statistical significance was 0.05 for that. So I think that is interesting. And then there was also a study that was done in the field of art. And in this session, in this article, what happened was the authors, I'm gonna have to switch screens here. They looked at
Same thing again.
Okay, so what's happening here is that I have it dual screened. So what I need to do is be able to click on my other screen to see my notes and then come back. So I'll always be out clicking back so you don't see that anymore.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. And so what happens in the art study is that the artists were studying different types of art history, and they were looking at paintings by different artists, and then they were either studying one artist at a time, then moving on to the next one and the next one. And what the researchers found was that individuals who studied multiple artists at the same time actually did better on remembering the retention of the different artists and their techniques. And then there's research from math, the math field as well, that supports the use of interleaving in the future. So then we've got additional research here. I won't go into a great amount of detail on this, but research on interleaving has shown that it can improve learning in more than one area, that it has improvement for technical skills, that it can help students avoid confusion because they're having to learn the distinctions between different concepts and ideas. Often it's best when you're interleaving to kind of interleave things that are similar so that students can really just start to differentiate the differences. And that can lead to greater retention. Interleaving can also lead to greater focus and attention because they have to pay attention again to those differences that are happening when they're having to switch back and forth instead of studying one particular topic or area within a discipline at a time. So then let's talk about what interleaving is related to. I think this gives a little bit of context for interleaving because often it can be it works well with some other teaching trends that have a lot of research behind them as well. And so one is that interleaving is related to the spacing effect. So the spacing effect is this idea that learning should be spaced out over time, and that you shouldn't kind of cram. I think we've all probably crammed for a test before, but when we're looking for long-term memory retention, it actually, research has shown that it is best to spread out the learning. So it might be that you study something for, one day, and then you study it again 3 days later, and then another 3 days later, and you kind of spread it out. It doesn't have to be, always at the same interval of 3 days, but just as an example. I know that working with students, I often see the greatest learning impact when we circle back to something over and over again throughout the semester. And that can be a way of both using interleaving and the spacing effect at the same time. And then again, here's just kind of the definition for the spacing effect, that it refers to finding that long-term memory is enhanced when learning events are spaced apart rather than massed in immediate succession. And then interleaving is also related to retrieval practice. And retrieval practice is this idea that you have to kind of force your brain to retrieve information, and that can really help with the learning process. And so we often think of retrieval maybe as a quiz or a test, and that can certainly be a good example of retrieval. But there can certainly be other things as well that can be done. It could be a kind of a quiz game at the beginning of a class, or it could be the use of flashcards. Anything that asks students to think about what they know and kind of pull it out of their memory is what retrieval practice is. And it is, here's the definition. Retrieval practice is a strategy in which bringing information to mind enhances and boosts learning. Deliberately recalling information forces us to pull our knowledge out and examine what we know. And so there's actually, I believe, going to be a session at South by Southwest later this year on retrieval practice. This author has a site, has written numerous books and articles on retrieval practice. Retrievalpractice.org is a wonderful site. It has information on retrieval practice, but there's also something on the spacing effect and interleaving as well. So if you're interested in kind of digging into some of the literature behind these ideas, that's definitely a website that I would recommend for you. Then let's talk about why interleaving works. So I mentioned this a little bit already, but interleaving works for a variety of reasons. One of those is transfer. So we often, when we talk about learning, we talk about the importance of learning transfer and how you can take something that you learned and apply it in multiple situations. It could be multiple classes, in multiple disciplines. And when you force it to interleave content and study more than one thing at a time, you start to see those, which relates to the next article, similarities and differences between concepts, between disciplines, between topics within one discipline, which makes the ability to transfer it easier. And then also interleaving has been shown to benefit problem solving because often students are having to problem solve. They're having to use their brain in some different ways when we're asking them to work with multiple topics and kind of jump back and forth between them in a class. So how do you implement interleaving? And this is kind of a key here to what I'll be talking about, but incorporating interleaving into course design. And then you could also encourage students to use interleaving just individually in their own study practice. So if you're thinking about interleaving in course design, it's important that you start by identifying the content that you want to interleave. And this might sound kind of really straightforward, but I think a better way of asking it is, what do I want my students to remember? And that's really what content should be interleaved. And you might be kind of tempted to say, well, I want them to remember everything, but that might not be fully realistic. And so, for example, I teach some classes, and one that I'm going to be talking about is, research methods. That's a class where I use interleaving in. It's an introductory to research methods class. Students are learning qualitative, quantitative mixed methods. They do kind of an initial research proposal for a study. And I want them to remember, everything I can say about that class. And in that class, there are some concepts that rise to the level of more importance than others. Really mixed methods, qualitative methods, quantitative methods. Those are really kind of some of the key things I want them to remember. We talk about other things, though. We talk about APA, we talk about literature reviews. Those are obviously really important concepts as well. But I really try to focus in on the different research methods for interleaving. So here is an example of how I do this in an online class. I introduce qualitative methods, discuss qualitative methods, introduce quantitative methods, apply qualitative methods, discuss quantitative methods. Then I introduce mixed methods. I have them apply quantitative methods. Then we discuss mixed methods and apply mixed methods. So you can see that I kind of have them go back and forth between the different research methods throughout the semester. We do different activities with them at different times. They are introduced to things. I do kind of push mixed methods a little bit more towards the end, just because it is mixed. And so they have to have a good foundation in both qualitative and quantitative before getting into that mixed methods. And in some ways, mixed methods is an interleaving in and of itself, but that might look different in your classes. So what I would encourage you to be thinking about right now is just how you can take some concepts that you have in your classes and think about how you could design a class where students are going back and forth between some of those main ideas throughout the semester. Because often, as you know this, we might spend 4 weeks on qualitative, 4 weeks on quantitative, 4 weeks on mixed methods, and then maybe we do some review in the last 4 weeks. And so we, again, kind of do that blocking. But if we want to use what the research says about memory retention and how students learn, having this interleaving approach, again, and you can see that this would even be mixed again with that spacing effect, would be more beneficial. So another thing to think about when you're specifically teaching online is that you need to think about the tools that you're going to use to facilitate this interleaved approach. And so in the case of my classes and the example that you just saw, I use these types of activities to interleave. So I also interleave the tools, in other words. There's lots of different ways that I teach online, and there's more things that I do than just what you see here, of course. But there are some things that I like to keep consistent so that students don't spend too much time trying to learn a new tool and can instead focus on the content, which is really what I want them to focus on. So again, interleaving those practices and those tools can help facilitate some of the learning methods that I want to use in my classes. So then that was a little bit about interleaving with, some course design. And so we've talked about this already, but what I would really like you to kind of focus in here is how those kind of fit together. And that we're introducing that qualitative, we are discussing the qualitative, applying it, and then applying and then introducing something else. And when I have done this in class, because this is a question that I often get when I talk about this, and is what do students think of kind of this approach? And I will say that I have certainly seen some frustration in my students when this has been introduced to them, that this is the way that the class is structured, because it requires some additional thoughts for them. And I think it is a little bit of extra effort because they are having to switch back and forth between topics and remember, what they learned a few weeks ago instead of what they might have learned last week. And that can be frustrating. But one way that I try to address that up front is I explain why I have designed the class in this way. I share the research on that class. I said the research on interleaving. I try not to make a secret of why I design courses the way that I do. And that normally kind of helps alleviate some of the stress or frustration that might come along with using an interleaved approach to course design. And it looks like there might be some questions here. So it says, one person said, it goes against the easiest thing to do, which is, be told something and then repeat the thing. It requires some thought, absolutely. And Allie said, I think it depends on how closely the concepts and vocabulary are tied. They need to show up in the middle of the Venn diagram. Okay, thank you for that. Yeah, and sometimes that can be, frustrating for them too. Just if there's something that is very similarly connected, where is the overlap and where are the differences? And that, you're right, can be placed in a Venn diagram. So there can be that could be one activity that we would do. Where are the similarities and where are the differences? One person also said, Megan said, it goes against how we think we learn best. Yes, and there's actually some research that supports what you just said there, Megan, is that there was a research study done, and forgive me that I don't remember the author off the top of my head, but if you go and look for it, you'll find it, where a study was done where students, they used an interleaved approach in one course, kind of a regular blocked in another course, and asked students how they thought they learned best. And then they took the tests and to see what was actually correct. And they thought they learned the best with a traditional blocked approach, even though the test results showed the exact opposite. So you're right, it goes against how we think we learn, but the research is definitely there to support it. There are a few studies that you'll see if you dig into on the research where it doesn't show as good of effects, but that tends to be when the topics being interleaved are vastly different. And there was one in the languages where interleaving wasn't working as well. And there's some thoughts there on it could be because of just the way we learn language. And how we often learn, language as a child and kind of being immersed in it. And we know that can often be true when we move to someplace else where they speak a different language that isn't, one we're not familiar with, that often kind of immersion is really helpful. And so there's some thoughts that that's why it doesn't seem to work as well in a language situation. But the research, it's not quite as clear on that. Good. Please keep up if you have any additional thoughts, or I'll be monitoring the chat. So. Okay. So then, as you think about the different activities that you can do to kind of include interleaving in your course design, I kind of showed you what I did with readings and discussion board and application activities, but you could also have things like practice problems where, especially if you're doing a math class, you can put in different types of problems that you're using throughout the semester. You can create projects that force students to interleave content and go back, discussions. There's lots of different ways that you can think about interleaving. It doesn't have to always be as kind of clear cut as I might have shown you with that bullet pointed list. I think you can certainly create activities where students are using the different skills that they're learning in a bigger project. So the researchers, the question here in the chat from Deanna is, did the researchers comment on why this worked? For example, is it due to the novelty of this? So the way that the research is, that's how our brains work, that when our brains are forced to kind of study different things and really work at the learning, that's when we remember when there is a little bit of a difficulty there. The research calls that a desirable difficulty. Yes, so interleaving, so James Lane's book, Small Teaching, is a good example. There's also another great book called Make It Stick, The Science of Learning. That's another good, yes, Make It Stick is another good book that talks about interleaving. There's also some really good research by, I don't know if I'm going to remember his first name, York, out of a university in California, has done a lot of research on this as well. But that idea of desirable difficulty is really why interleaving has been shown to work, and why the spacing effect works and retrieval practice works as well. So that's another great book. Thanks for putting those in the chat. So yeah, so I am certainly not the person to come up with this. There are lots of good research to support this idea, and these are just how I have been using it in my own classes. So I've already spent some time talking about that, so I'm going to jump on. Yeah, you're welcome. So I said that you can use interleaving in course design, but that you can also use interleaving in student learning. And this, I think, is also really important, because while we can use it in course design, if students are needing to memorize, do a lot of practicing on their own, having them start kind of working on some of those desirable difficulties, such as interleaving in their own study practice, can really take the learning even a step farther. And so what that can look like, and I think this is really important, is to share the research on interleaving with students. Explain why it works. Explain how it can look in their own study practice. The more that they know about how their brain learns, the better that it's going to be for them. Yes, it might be unpleasant at times because it is harder, but the results will be there. So some specific examples of how students can use interleaving in their own study is flashcards. So what you could do, and there's some examples online that I've seen. This is one thing that I encourage with my own students, is that as they're learning different concepts throughout a course, they can just start making a group of flashcards, and instead of moving on maybe to a new group of flashcards after they've taken a test, they can just incorporate a new set of flashcards with the old ones and just keep going back and forth between the different concepts. This might work really well in a biology class, for example. And that way they're used to switching back and forth between different systems. And then at the end of the semester, when you might have a final, they have been learning all of those interleaved throughout the semester. Encourage the idea to study more than one topic at a time. Go back and forth. It could be that students are using flashcards and mixing them together from both their biology class and their chemistry class. And it could be also in study groups that you're having when groups are maybe quizzing each other about topics or engaging in a study session, that they are also moving back and forth between similar classes, similar topics within a class, and not just always staying with a blocked study session as well. So I'm curious, have you used interleaving yourself? Or have you, and you can just type in the chat, yes or no. Okay, so some yeses, some nos. I also saw a question up here that I'm going to go ahead and answer. Can we incorporate it into instructional game design to make it more interesting? Absolutely. There's some kind of easy ways to do that, like a game, like a quiz game. Kahoot, would be one way of including it, but it could certainly be done. Absolutely. And then I think Deanna said, I think we do this naturally with lab write-ups. The students revisit the scientific method each time and build on that material. Absolutely, yes. So they build on it and you have to go back. The key there, I think, is to make sure that they're fully aware that they're kind of going back and having to revisit it so that they have to really process through it each time. Okay, good. Good questions. So I asked this question, I mentioned this earlier when I was talking about when you start thinking about interleaving, you have to start by determining what you want, what content you want to interleave. In other words, what content do you want your students to remember? So now I'd like you to take a minute, reflect on content that you feel would be really useful for interleaving, whether that is interleaving through course design or asking your students to interleave that content in their own study sessions. And I'd love for you to put that in the chat, maybe share it with everybody so that we can get some ideas here. One thing that I always think about presentations is that they need to be interesting and practical. And so I think it's important that you reflect on your own practice as an educator. And hopefully if you think about that, you can think about what content you want to interleave. And then this session can be very practical to you. So I shared that I like to use interleaving with research methods. That's a class that I feel like lends itself pretty well. There are some other classes such as educational technology leadership that doesn't lend itself quite as well to an interleaved approach. Just the nature of the class and what I ask the students to do with what they need to remember. But I'm sure you all have content that you really want your students to remember. I'm not seeing any chat messages about particular content though. Well, keep thinking about it, keep reflecting on it. Okay, so the response is, it seems a bit ambitious to ask the students to do too much of anything outside of class. Maybe if you structure review in such a way as to have them interleave. Okay. Yes, I mean, you could certainly structure review sessions around that. Absolutely. Using directional terms while learning new anatomy terms, absolutely. Different lab activities that could apply in technology-based classes. So yeah, just be reflecting to yourself on what this could look like in your own educational setting. Then I don't know that we have time for this activity, so I think I'm going to move on it here. But now that we've thought about what content we might want to interleave, I'd like you to reflect on how you would do that. So one person said earlier that it might not work so well having students work on it outside of class. So instead, it could be something that was done in class for like a review structure. So that could be a way that you're wanting to use interleaving in review at review time. Melissa said, I like to use interleaving in my pop culture class. We apply certain concepts throughout the semester as we move to different units, race, class, gender, sexuality. Great, thank you. But I would encourage you to think, specifically about, okay, what tools in my class do I want to use for interleaving? What activities do I want to create in an in-class situation? If you're not teaching online, would you want to use to interleave? We talked about games earlier and how that can be one way, discussions, application, but there's other ways that you could do it. So anybody could share, but that's just something else that I would like you to reflect on. Then once you think about how you want to interleave, what content, what tools you would use, it's then the best thing to do next is to identify the specific tools that you want to use, especially if you're teaching in an online environment. If that's discussion boards, if that's a wiki, if it is something I know I do optional synchronous sessions. Most of my classes are asynchronous, but you could do something in a synchronous environment if you are teaching that way. I have peer review groups in my classes that I ask them to engage and work with each other. VoiceThread, thank you, has been helpful, absolutely. A Slack discussion board, that can be useful as well. It really depends, again, so much on your learning management system, the tools that you bring in from outside and have available, either within the learning management system or supplementary to it. So, the one thing here is this one person said, that you would advocate for an asynchronous multidisciplinary instruction that truly interleaves. So there is some research out there that seems to indicate that interleaving with vastly different subject areas isn't as helpful as interleaving somewhat similar concepts, because and part of that reasoning, the thought process there is that when they're so different, the brain isn't having to distinguish between the differences and similarities as much, that it is, it's easier for people to see the differences quickly between art and science, for example. But still asking students to move back and forth does create more of an opportunity for recall, so retrieval. That would definitely be one aspect of it as well. Mm-hmm. Yes, math and chemistry could be good examples, because there are some similarities there. Mm-hmm. So one person asked, what about interleaving in multimedia? Would that be considered presenting two different related topics in a single video, freeform style, sandbox gamification? You certainly could. I think it would depend on how you would do it, but absolutely. I mean, technology is great for things like this, in my opinion, and why I like to use it, because you can use so many different tools to help you achieve your goal and make it a little bit more interesting and interactive for students. Statistics and science, yes, a lot of overlap there as well. Okay. So we are close to the end of time here. Here are some references. You will see those articles that I found, this Make It Stick. You'll see that the authors of Make It Stick, at least the first author, he's written a lot of other things in this area. So if you're looking for an author to kind of research or look up, his work is good. And then that the Dr. Bjork that I mentioned earlier has done a lot. He is the second author on the second reference here. Then if you're looking for something that is in a research article that is a little bit more accessible, if you'd like to share it with students. So a secondary piece that I found very useful is that first bullet point from Scientific America. And that is one that I like to share with students. So I like to share the research articles too, but the Scientific America article, I think, makes interleaving a lot more accessible for students who may not be as entrenched in education and kind of cognitive psychology research as some of us. So thank you all. Do you have any questions? Is there anything I can answer? Well, thank you all. Thanks for your time today.
And thank you, Lauren. I think we found this really interesting and learned something. I know I did. So, really appreciate it.